Now, belief is one of those words we use all of the time in Christian circles. We talk about it. We make it essential to salvation. You must believe in God. You must believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. But it's one of those fuzzy words, you know. It's one of those abstract words that isn't always clearly defined and isn't always clearly understood by the people who are even saying it and the people who are trying to accept it. Now, belief is often painted in the light of you don't have evidence for this thing being true, but you choose to believe it anyway. So a lot of atheists, for example, will attack the concept of belief by saying, well, belief is an unwarranted belief in something that you don't have any evidence for. And some Christians buy into that, but I actually think there's a deeper way to understand this idea. And here I want to leverage yet again Iain McGilchrist, because he talks about belief in terms of the left and right hemispheres. The left hemisphere and the right hemisphere conceive of things a little bit differently. And the way it conceives of certain words is different as well. And belief is one of those words that are conceived of a little bit differently. Now, I would say, even without going into hemisphere differences, it's helpful to recognize that belief isn't an unwarranted thing, okay? Because a lot of people like to paint it that way. Let me just go to here. Here you can see in the Lexham Theological Word Book, they say belief is to accept the truth of a person or reality, normally on the basis of the proven reliability of the object. So note, it isn't unwarranted. Here's the idea. Somebody tells you something, and they have earned your trust so that you believe what they say, even though you don't have all of the facts or all of the evidence. In the Bible, belief is usually directed towards God or Christ and implies trust in and reliance upon him. The point for Christianity being, God has proven himself, therefore he warrants trust and belief. Okay, fair enough. But this is getting into sticky theological categories without dealing with the heart of the atheist contention that belief seems unwarranted. And it's at this point that I want to bring up the left and right hemisphere differences when it comes to the topic of belief. Of course, you guys know who we've got. We've got our friend Iain McGilchrist, okay? Iain McGilchrist, for those who don't know, wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary, and here he examines the left and right hemispheres. And here's his contention. The left hemisphere thinks of belief differently than the right hemisphere does. And what I want to say is that in Christian circles, we have so often accepted the left hemisphere's call to action when it comes to belief. You say you believe? Well, here is what you need in order to believe. And all of us are just talking with the left hemisphere, evangelicals and atheists alike. And we get into conversations and discussions about belief, but never do we consider the right hemisphere's idea of what it means to believe. So without further ado, let's listen to Iain McGilchrist, what he has to say, and I'm going to pause a couple of times to deal with his ideas. Let's hear what he has to say.
I will conclude the chapter with brief discussions of a few of these faux amis, or false friends, that arise when the right and left hemispheres understand words differently. Knowledge and truth I have discussed. Again, there are two versions, one purporting to be impersonal, static, complete, a thing, and the other personal, provisional, a matter of degree, a journey. Belief is closely related and has two meanings too. Belief. Believing is not to be reduced to thinking that such and such might be the case. It is not a weaker form of thinking laced with doubt. Sometimes we speak like this: I believe that the train leaves at 6:13, where I believe that simply means that I think, but am not certain that. Since the left hemisphere is concerned with what is certain, with knowledge of the facts, its version of belief is that it is just absence of certainty. If the facts were certain according to its view, I should be able to say, I know that instead. This view of belief comes from the left hemisphere's disposition towards the world, interest in what is useful, therefore fixed and certain. The train timetable is no good if one can't rely on it. So belief is just a feeble form of knowing as far as it is concerned. But belief in terms of the right hemisphere is different, because its disposition towards the world is different. The right hemisphere does not know anything in the sense of certain knowledge. For it, belief is a matter of care. It describes a relationship where there is a calling and an answering, the root concept of responsibility. Thus, if I say that I believe in you, it does not mean that I think that such and such things are the case about you, but can't be certain that I'm right. It means that I stand in a certain sort of relation of care towards you that entails me in certain kinds of ways of behaving, acting and being towards you, and entails on you the responsibility of certain ways of acting and being as well. It is an acting as if certain things were true about you that in the nature of things cannot be certain. It has the characteristic right hemisphere qualities of being a betweenness, a reverberative, renascent, responsible relationship in which each party is altered by the other and by the relationship between the two, whereas the relationship of the believer to the believed in the left hemisphere sense is inert, unidirectional, and centers on control rather than care. I think this is what Wittgenstein was trying to express when he wrote that my attitude towards the other is an attitude towards a soul. I am not of the opinion that he has a soul. An opinion would be a weak form of knowledge. That is not what is meant by a belief, a disposition, or an attitude.
Okay, so we're going to stop there for now. Notice how he distinguishes that for the left hemisphere, there is this distinction between knowledge and belief, and that belief is merely a weaker form of knowledge. You don't have enough evidence to say you know something, so instead you're just saying you believe something. It's important to note at this point that the left hemisphere is the hemisphere of certainty. The left hemisphere believes that it knows what it's talking about. It believes it can go it alone. It believes that it's right. That is the hemisphere of certainty. Whereas the right hemisphere is the hemisphere of uncertainty, the hemisphere of the vague, the hemisphere of in-betweenness, as he puts it. Okay? So, the left hemisphere, when it talks about belief, wants to know, do you believe or do you not? Are you certain? Are you not? And that is how the majority of society uses the word belief, okay? His point is that this is already stacking the deck in the favor of the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere wants intellectual propositions set out in certain or uncertain terms and wants you to intellectually assent to said propositions, i.e., you believe them. But the right hemisphere doesn't consider belief in that way. The right hemisphere thinks about belief in terms of relationships. The right hemisphere thinks about belief in terms of betweenness. Context is what the right hemisphere cares about. And so when it comes to the concept of belief, you can see in the right hemisphere, the question is that of responsibility, as he puts it. If I believe in you, that means not that I believe you exist, but that in the context of this relationship, I have some sort of responsibility or faith or trust in you. You see how different that is? When we talk about these topics in Christian, non-Christian conversations, we rarely define our terms, and belief is one where I think even if we defined our terms, oftentimes Christians would allow the left hemisphere mode of thinking to set the terms of engagement. But in reality, that's not nearly as helpful as understanding how belief is concentrated in either hemisphere. So I think that's important to recognize. There's one illustration that I think helps with this idea. We often say things like, actions speak louder than words. I've used that little phrase quite a few times in my sermons. Actions speak louder than words. I actually think we're capturing something that's of a deeper importance with that little quip. When we say actions speak louder than words, we're telling people, you tell me more about what you believe with how you act than with what you say you believe with your words, okay? Saying what you believe with your words is kind of like the left hemisphere. Acting out what you believe with your life, with your actions, is kind of like belief with the right hemisphere. That's kind of how they work, because it's a relationship, okay? So think of that idea. Now, he's going to turn his attention to the concept of belief in God, so it's very relevant to what we're talking about here. Let's hear what he has to say about belief in God. A couple more minutes.
This helps illuminate belief in God. This is not reducible to a question of a factual answer to the question, does God exist, assuming for the moment that the expression a factual answer has a meaning. It is having an attitude, holding a disposition towards the world, whereby that world, as it comes into being for me, is the one in which God belongs. The belief alters the world, but also alters me. Is it true that God exists? Truth is a disposition, one of being true to someone or something. One cannot believe in nothing and thus avoid belief altogether, simply because one cannot have no disposition towards the world, that being in itself a disposition. Some people choose to believe in materialism. They act as if such a philosophy were true. An answer to the question whether God exists could only come from my acting as if God is, and in this way being true to God and experiencing God, or, not as the case might be, as true to me. If I am a believer, I have to believe in God, and God, if he exists, has to believe in me. Rather like Escher's hands, the belief must arise reciprocally, not by a linear process of reasoning. This acting as if is not a sort of cop-out, an admission that really one does not believe what one pretends to believe. Quite the opposite. As Hans Weinger understood, all knowledge, particularly scientific knowledge, is no more than an acting as if certain models were for the time being true. Truth and belief, once more, as in their etymology, are profoundly connected. It is only the left hemisphere that thinks there is certainty to be found anywhere.
Boom. It is only the left hemisphere that thinks there is certainty to be found anywhere. The right hemisphere doesn't even function on that way, or on that basis, or in that way. So, this is really helpful when it comes to the idea of belief in God. Because, just like he says, it's not about intellectual propositions and just assenting to them. It's about ordering yourself in the world as if these things were true. This gets to something that I think is really important when it comes to discipleship. I've talked about this before. When you disciple somebody, you are not merely trying to increase their head knowledge. When you disciple somebody, you're trying to cause a transformation in the person as a whole. And we are multiple things at once. We have a brain, yes, but we also act in the world. And sometimes our beliefs in our head don't line up with our actions in life. How often do we say things like, I want to get into shape, I want to lose weight, I'm going to diet, I'm going to exercise, etc. But when we act in the world, we sit on the couch eating Cheetos playing video games, right? We don't act the same beliefs that we have in our head. There's a disparity there. And part of Christian transformation comes from embracing the fact that we need to change in all parts of our person. Not only that, the affections need to be brought into this situation. You think things, you act things, but you also feel and emote certain things. One of the goals of Christian discipleship is to line all three of these areas up under the banner of Christ so that they're unified. But we as human beings, this side of heaven, under the reign of the fall, the age of decay, we as human beings don't always get our beliefs, our actions, and our affections lined up correctly. I think this helps us because the right hemisphere, when it talks about belief, is talking more about life and actions. The left hemisphere, when it's talking about belief, is talking about more mind and thoughts. And here we too often, as Christians, especially evangelical Christians, just allow the left hemisphere to set the terms of engagement. Okay, that's what you mean by a belief. I think something that is really illustrative when it comes to this is the discussion between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And here they talked about the idea of belief in God. And I think this is very, very intriguing what they talk about at this point. Because Sam Harris wants to know if Peterson believes. And he kind of throws it out there, and Peterson gives his answer. Okay, let's hear what they have to say here. Let me turn it down a tad.
I'm tempted to just ask Jordan a question here. I mean, it's hard to know what to save for tomorrow night, but I feel like we've got 3,000 people sitting here who would really like an answer to this question. You say you believe in God. You have been...
No, I say I act as if he exists.
You say what?
I say I act as if he exists,
Okay,
which is a much more precise claim.
Okay.
Look at that. Look at that. I hope you guys saw it through the lens of Iain McGilchrist. Okay? Here we have Harris, and Harris says, you say you believe in God, i.e., left hemisphere. And Peterson corrects him and says, no, what I tell people is I act as though God exists. What Peterson essentially just did, I hope you caught it, is he says, Sam, I don't know if I believe in God with the left hemisphere, but I believe in him with the right hemisphere. Do you hear that difference? He's saying, oh man, Sam wants me to intellectually assent to this proposition. Do you believe in God, i.e. with the left hemisphere? And Peterson is quick to clarify, I believe in God with the right hemisphere. And this is something that is so frustrating for Sam. Sam doesn't like this because he's left hemisphere and he wants certainty. And Peterson refuses to give it to him because Peterson is essentially saying, I believe in God with the right hemisphere. That is a big difference. Now, a lot of people ask this question, does Jordan Peterson believe in God? Does he not? Etc. Well, acting as though God exists is, according to Iain McGilchrist, essentially believing in God with the right hemisphere. So to me, that's mostly there. But you do have the question of, do you believe in God with the left hemisphere? And that's something that Jordan often leaves open. He isn't really sure if he believes in God with the left hemisphere. I just have a quick one here from a little discussion that he did on a Q&A panel. Somebody asked, do you believe in God? And let's listen to his response and how he deals with this question.
Jordan, I've actually heard you ask this question a number of times, and I don't think I've ever heard you give a definitive answer.
Yeah, I don't like the question.
Yeah. How come?
Well, I don't know exactly. I think part of it
is
is
too
because,
personal?
Yeah, I think it's private. You know, there's a...
Just notice his tone, right? I don't like the question. Well, why? Why don't you like the question? Well, I think it's a private question. And watch as he talks through it. He's wrestling with the fact that he believes in God with the right hemisphere, but the left hemisphere, he's not willing to go there yet.
Statement in the Old Testament about the what would you call it, immorality of praying in public, let's say, to make known your good works, your faith, because of the benefits that might confer upon you that have absolutely nothing to do with the moral actions that might allow you to truly deserve them. I mean, I think of religious matters a lot. I would consider myself a deeply religious person. I would say, and I have said this before, that I act as if God exists and that I'm terrified that he might. And
I act as though God exists. I believe in him with my right hemisphere, and I'm terrified that he might. I am struggling with the idea of embracing that fully with my left hemisphere.
But I don't consider myself an authority on metaphysical issues, and I don't believe that my belief in God is... It's not something that seems to me to be fit for... There's something wrong that I can't put my finger on triumphantly declaiming my belief in one manner or another. And so it's something that I prefer.
It feels wrong to him because he recognizes using the left hemisphere to just declare something out in the universe doesn't cover the whole picture. It doesn't wrap everything up. And he intuitively knows this to be the case because Peterson is very strong in the right hemisphere.
Prefer to leave in the manner that I've left it. So I act as if God exists. I try to do my best as a person who's obsessed with religious matters. But I'm not willing to place myself conveniently in a box. And so I'm going to leave it at that.
So there you go. He's not willing to place himself in a box. Again, his frustration, his struggle here is the fact that right hemisphere belief in God feels sufficient to him. It feels like that covers much more than all of these interviewers are asking. They want a triumphant left hemisphere declaration, and he's just like, that feels wrong. It feels bad. And you know what's funny is this is precisely the thing that evangelicals want from Peterson. Evangelicals want Peterson to come out and triumphantly declare, I believe in God with my left hemisphere. Why? That's what we do in evangelical circles. Do you believe or do you not believe? After all, the Bible says to believe, and we just go on and on. All the while not realizing that our evangelicalism has caused us to adopt a left hemisphere understanding of belief. And again, this is what I was talking about before. Discipleship is a whole person process. It's beliefs, it's actions, it's affections. And what Peterson is essentially saying is my beliefs haven't really caught up to my actions and my affections yet. I think that's a very interesting idea. Very interesting idea. Now, this is related to one other concept, okay? And this comes up a lot in atheist Christian discussions. And it has to do with the unbeliever is a believer after all. And at this point, I want to go to Romans chapter 1. Listen to Romans chapter 1. Atheists often are frustrated when you quote this verse because they think you're calling them a liar. Listen to what it has to say. Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, has been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. In the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened. Here, Christians come and they go, look, they knew God. They believe he exists. And you tell the unbeliever that, and they go, how dare you call me a liar? How dare you call me a liar? Right? Well, my Bible says that you believe. Really, you're just suppressing that truth. But they truly, genuinely think, with the left hemisphere, that they don't believe. Well, let's ask ourselves, do they believe? Well, with the right hemisphere, do they functionally act as though God exists? And for many atheists, I would say, yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Let's listen to the rest of this conversation with Peterson and Harris, because Harris is going to go a little bit further with Peterson's claims here.
Okay, so then what, but in this case, so you act as though God exists.
Yep.
And in addition, I've heard you say that I act as though God exists, that I can't really be an atheist.
So far it seems
Yeah,
that.
right, yeah.
We'll see.
The night is young.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm not really an atheist. I've heard you say this. So that
Well, some of you is.
well, if
Some of you is. Your left hemisphere is an atheist, right? But you functionally act in the world as though you're not. You know what I mean? And this is one of the criticisms. If you understand the moral argument for the existence of God, this is one of the criticisms that Christians often point back to atheists. That if the world is just material things, a random collection of atoms that are spinning about, then there is no moral ought or obligation out there in the universe that can impose itself upon us. And yet, atheists are often very moral people. So what's going on here? What's going on here? Well, Peterson is getting at the heart of the matter a little bit. We believe and don't believe things in a whole multitude of, in various ways throughout our lives, okay? What you believe is not 100% perspicuous to you. You don't necessarily know what you believe. You don't necessarily know all of the things that you believe or why you believe them. So much of the human consciousness is thinking and feeling out loud in the universe. And that's what Peterson is getting at. He's saying not all of your beliefs seem to comport with each other.
If I were really an atheist, I would be far more poorly behaved than in fact I am. Right? I would be like Raskolnikov committing murders and assuming there was nothing wrong with it.
It would be more likely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Wait, that's a big distinction. That
I need
you would
I need
versus
to
it would
know.
be more likely.
What was that?
It's a big distinction that you.
So I'll stop there. It's a good debate, a good discussion. 2 takeaways I want people to get. Okay? The first is that belief is a complicated creature. Okay? And this is made even more complicated by virtue of the fact that we need to distinguish between believing with the left hemisphere and believing with the right hemisphere. So that's point number 1. But the second thing I want you to realize is oftentimes there's these discussions and atheists feel really, really confident because they have left hemisphere dominance, that they know what they believe, they know why they believe it, and why can't you just come out straightforward and clearly and state what you believe? And the contention that religious people are often putting forth is human beings are much more complicated creatures than that. I don't know that you're necessarily confident or that you necessarily know what you believe or don't believe. I don't know that you can really discern those things. I don't know that that is clear to you, right? And so that's an important thing to recognize. So I hope this was a helpful discussion for you guys. I don't purport to have all of the answers, but I do think that we need to be a little more clear about our discussion of belief and what is, right hemisphere belief, what is left hemisphere belief, and then, of course, there's the whole distinction of justified true belief and all of those other ideas. This can get very complicated very quickly, but this is an area that I think often, again, atheists and Christians talk past each other when there's no need to do so. Thank you so much for watching that video. If you enjoyed this video, you might like this one as well. It's on a similar topic. While you're here, would you please click the subscribe button? And if you would like to support us on Patreon, please check out the link in the description below. It really helps us out a lot. Also, we have many other links below in the description that can help you get plugged into what we're doing here on YouTube. Thank you so much for being a part of what we do. Take care. God bless. Bye now.